How many are excited about the new year? If you were, I don't remember what night it was, but a little while back I talked about a message about the Lord dealing with us according to our expectations. And it's true. Expectation is kind of like saying, what is our faith? You know, what are we believing for? And although I'm not coining this, 2025, the Year of Jubilee, that's the title of my message today, is the Year of Jubilee. 2025, the Year of Jubilee. If anything, what the Lord has given for me this year is just a rhyming, you may think silly statement, but the Lord showed it to me. He said, hey, in 2025, my church shall be revived. And I'm going to talk about it in the upcoming weeks, because revive could mean a few things. It don't just, revive could mean dead and coming back to life, but I don't think we're dead. But I'm reminded of this is off topic, but that's okay. It's the new year, and I want to plant a few things in your heart here. In the book of Revelation, and I'm not going to turn there, I'm going to try to remember and paraphrase, but he said to one of the churches in Asia there, he said that they were slumbering, that they had fallen asleep. And he said there was a few things that they were lacking and stuff. He said, strengthen up what you got. Strengthen up what remains. And sometimes we might find ourselves in a spot where it's like, you know, we're not all that in a bag of chips, but our God still is. And he would say, that's fine. What's your strengths? What's your giftings? Where have I placed you? What have I done through you? Get ready to see God revive in 2025. I really believe that. But today, because I wanted to read this passage about the Year of Jubilee, I kind of made the message entitled the Year of Jubilee. But here's the whole thing in a nutshell. I'm going to give you it right up front. For believers, the new year is a God-given opportunity for rest, renewal, and for a reset. That's what it's really all about here. And I want you to be able to take advantage, the full advantage, and receive the full benefit of God's cycles, including the new year. I want that to be what our church does. It takes advantage of that. You know, some people think that the new year is nothing. It's just another day on the calendar. You know, it means nothing. Hey, I've heard some people kind of cynically say, it's just another trip around the sun. You know, it's just another gray whisker hair. It's just another, you know, it's nothing. It's just a new year. What is there to look forward to? Well, remember, the Lord deals with us according to our expectations. In the book of Genesis, chapter 1, you don't have to turn there, but if you want to get ahead of me, you can turn to Leviticus 25. That's where I'm going to read a portion. But in Genesis 1, in the creation story, God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens, to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, seasons, and for days and years. He's talking about the cosmos. He's talking about our solar system, the stars, the different things. Some people say it's just the passing of time. It's a new year. It doesn't mean anything. And it does say there it was for the day and for the night, for days and for years. That's true. It is a measurement of time, and God does things in time. You know, he'll tell people, sadly, for example, and I'll kind of lead into the Jubilee, he told Abraham at one point, he said, your people in the future are going to go into captivity for 400 years. He told Israel at one point when Babylon and Assyria were coming up and Israel was in sin, he said, they're going to take you captive for 70 years. He uses time. God uses time. Okay? But it also says right here that let them be for signs and for seasons. See, we miss that part sometimes. You know, signs. What does signs have to do with anything? Well, I was kind of sharing with people as I was thinking this through, and the ice storm gave me weeks to think it through. I was ready to share this last week. But you know, there were some people, they weren't Christians. They weren't Jews. They didn't have a copy of the Torah. But during the time of Jesus' birth, they looked up at the stars and said, hey, there's a king being born. Let's go worship him. There was a sign in the sky, the Star of Bethlehem. And they said, let's go and worship him. I'm not into astrology, but hey, Somehow that almanac, it works. I don't know how these people figure things out, but the Farmer's Almanac, it tells people information about planting and stuff that works. There's a sign in the sky. I know that's what they're doing there. I'd just soon read my zodiac as I would believe my fortune cookie. As far as I'm concerned, that's not where I get my info from. See, I got an inside source. Okay, I mean, he's inside. He tells me things. So I don't need that stuff. But it's interesting. This is kind of interesting. This is just a food for thought. I'm not telling you to go and start reading your zodiac. But did you know in about right around 1 AD, what came into as far as the zodiac was the age of what? Pisces. I don't know if you ever heard about it. Right now we're in this transition where they say we're moving from Pisces to the age of Aquarius. Okay, you probably heard that old hippie song, The Age of Aquarius. I don't know how it goes. I don't really know that song. It's from the 60s or 70s or something. But let me tell you, what's the symbol of Pisces? A fish. Well, what happened? What was the early symbol in the church? It wasn't a cross. We don't have a cross right here. It wasn't a cross. It was a fish. If you ever see my Yukon, you'll see I got a little fish there. People think I'm going fishing, and I am. In a different sense. But I do like fishing as well. There's nothing wrong with fishing. Don't get me wrong. And if any of you plan on going and would like to invite me, I accept. Let's go fishing. So, but it's just interesting. Signs. You know, that the Lord put these things in the sky and said signs. There's been books written on the blood moons and other things. I am not up to speed on all that, so I won't try to teach you. But the Bible does say there will be signs in the end times. And some of them are astrological signs, the stars in the sky. What about seasons? You know, Brenda recently shared about seasons of fruitfulness in a message that she gave here. Pastor Brenda. Can I say that, Pastor? Yeah, I appreciate that text the other day, by the way. I said, hey, how you doing, Lon? He said, real good. And make sure, you know, how do you word it? I wish I had my phone on me. He said, we sure appreciate our Pastor Brenda, and you're okay too. I love it. I love it. So that's good. You know, Brenda was sharing about seasons of fruitfulness, and she used an analogy in her message about gardening. You know, that in the spring, these are all spiritual applications. So just, you know, I'll let you spiritual folks out here translate this into a spiritual application yourself without me doing it. But spring was for preparation of soil, planting, watering, fertilizing, and of course keeping the weeds down, because before them seeds sprout up, the weeds want to creep in quicker than your seeds germinate. Summer was, you got an early harvest, but there was a lot of growth, continuing the watering and feeding, and you got to continue to stay on top of them weeds, because during the summer they're growing fast too. Fall was, of course, harvest time and the most fruitful time and stuff, but you didn't hardly have to worry about the weeds anymore, because now the plants were strong and they were doing good, and you know, it was when the fruit was coming in. And of course, winter was for rest, for pruning, for planning, and for reflections. And of course, like I said, seasons are not just physical. They're important in all the cycles of life, including our spiritual. And the new year is an opportunity for rest and for recharge. I don't know about you, but Thanksgiving, Christmas, when the new year comes, and although this month we do have a few events going on, for the most part, a few of us have probably been happy to see that snow. We're like, hey, I'm staying in. I'm not going out. I'm just going to rest for a minute. You know, it's a moment for rest. The ground needs to rest from all the growing. You know, the ground brings forth the stuff, the seeds there, but it draws from the ground, the energy of the ground, and the ground needs a time to rest. There's a natural cycle of rest, and we need a rest, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. And we need to recharge. That's kind of what happens. I do know a little bit about this because, you know, just from reading and stuff, they say when the snows come and they drag certain minerals and stuff back into the earth, they pull it from different places, and it actually recharges and energizes the soil to be able to produce again. You know, the new year is also a chance for a pause and a reflection. You know, when we take that pause, it's not just to sit there and do nothing sometimes, but to reflect. That's what we're going to do at the business meeting tonight. Part of it is going to be reflecting upon what God has done in the new year. So to reflect. By the way, that's not all good. It could be bad. If we look at the last year and we say it was bad, well, we'll reflect upon that. God don't want us to have bad this year. If we had some bad with the good last year, we get to reflect about that and ponder that. Ask God about that. Pray about that. It's also a time in the new year for pruning and strengthening or redirecting. Brenda had watched a video which was pretty good, that in the winter, in the new year, is when you prune the branches how you want them to grow in the spring. And if you want to bend them or redirect them, wire them so that they're going to go the way you want them the next year, that's when you do it now, so that when spring comes into life, they're going the way you want. Well, the same thing with us. It's during the new year, again, as we're doing that reflecting and such, we're not just looking at it and saying, well, that was good or bad. We're saying, how can I redirect it? How can I prune it to make it more fruitful? How can I allow God's really the pruner, he's the gardener, we're his plant. And how am I going to let God prune me to make me more fruitful? How am I going to allow God to twist me and to bend me to make me more flexible for his glory in the next year? Okay? And then finally, I had one more here. God established this new year to be renewed and to reset. If there is anything that comes to your mind about bad in this next year, aren't you glad that God's mercies are new every morning? Come on, this isn't a time to look back and to drag our heads. This is a time to receive God's reset, to receive God's renewal. God established a natural winter season, if you will, in the basic concept of Sabbath. Every single, as I mentioned, day, mercies are new every day. Every single week, there's an end to the week, and there's a beginning to a new week. And so the Bible explains that this is the natural cycle. You have to have a time, a season, where something comes to an end so something new can come from that. We have to have a time of rest, renewal, reflection, all the things that I mentioned, in order to be prepared for the new. And one of those that's in the Bible, if you're there in Leviticus 25, is this idea about the Year of Jubilee. The Year of Jubilee. It's in Leviticus chapter 19. Chapter 25. Did I say 19? Chapter 25. And it'll start in verse 8. But before I read it, the Year of Jubilee was supposed to be every seventh set of 7 years. So 7 times 7, of course, is 49. That's in the scripture there, that this was supposed to take place. 7, Rhonda will like this one because she's a good preacher on numbers. I've still got that numbers Bible study you did in my drawer in my office. But 7 is the number of perfection. It's the day when God looked at everything and he rested because his work was good. It was perfect. It was good. What he had made, it's the number that we often call God's number. 6 being man's, 7 being God's. Man was created on the 6th. God rested on the 7th. So 7 times 7 is another way of saying perfection upon perfection. And what we can see from that is that God is showing that it's very, very good that we would have this cycle of rest on the 7th day. So, in the Year of Jubilee. So let me read this, starting in verse 8. And it says this, "And you shall count 7 Sabbaths of years for yourself, 7 times 7 years. And the time of the 7 Sabbaths of years shall be to you 49 years." So God did a pretty good job in spelling out all the multiplication that I did there, but I kind of wanted to share it myself, I guess. Verse 9, "Then you shall cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month, on the Day of Atonement." That's pretty interesting. "You shall make the trumpet to sound through all your land. And you shall consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout all the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee," which means celebration, by the way, a celebration for you. "And each of you shall return to his possession, and each of you shall return to his family. That 50th year shall be a jubilee to you. In it you shall neither sow nor reap," kind of like what you're supposed to do on the Sabbath day itself. what grows of its own accord, nor gather the grapes of your untended vine. For it is the Jubilee, it shall be holy to you. You shall eat its produce from the field. In the year of Jubilee, each of you shall return to his possession. And if you sell anything to your neighbor or buy from your neighbor's hands, you shall not oppress one another. According to the number of years after the Jubilee, you shall buy from your neighbor. And according to the number of years, he's talking about prorating here, essentially figuring out what the value of something is. You shall, crops he shall sell you, according to the number of years. And 16, according to the multitude of years you shall increase its price, and according to the fewer number of years you shall diminish its price. For he sells to you accordingly to the number of years of his crops. And what he's getting at with all this proration and numbers is number 17. Therefore you shall not oppress one another, but you shall fear your God, for I am the Lord your God. So I want to show you 5 quick points of interest in this passage. But before I do, I want to ask, how many here take notes? How many note takers we got? I see a few. I would like to encourage you in the new year. We always do New Year resolutions. I'm telling you, taking notes, it helps you in a few different ways. Number one, it gives you something to look back on the next day when you're refreshing yourself about what you learned. It helps you to learn. Some say there was a study done. Pastor Don Miller shared this with us recently, that you will remember more. You remember something when you hear it, but if you hear it and write it, then you'll remember it better. If you hear it, write it, and speak it, then you'll even hear better. Every time you add another piece to that, it increases your memory of that, which is pretty interesting. So could that be why the Lord said to Joshua, 1:8 and stuff, when he's going into land, he said not only to meditate on it, but to keep it on his lips and to also do it, to speak it, think it, say it. That's how we capture God's word and we really get renewed, is by putting it into practice. Jesus said, if anyone hears my word and puts it into practice, by doing something, by adding an action to it, it will really help you to remember. So I would encourage you, take notes this year. Take notes. Get a notebook, bring it with you, bring it with your Bible. Now, I'm already asking you a few things. Read that yearly Bible, take notes, but this is a good time for those sorts of encouragements here. But I want you to notice a few things here. Number one, the Year of Jubilee is announced on the Day of Atonement. It's announced on the Day of Atonement. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But also, its announcement, number two, is liberty. Its announcement is release. Its announcement is setting free. Think about how that connects with us today. Think about, when you have a debt. The Year of Jubilee means that I'm releasing you from that debt. The Year of Jubilee meant if you had gotten into a hard time, if there was a famine and so on, and that's kind of actually goes into number 3, returning to your possession and your family. God had in the beginning given this allotment to Israel, where every family of the 12 tribes got an allotment of land. So no matter what happened during that 70-year period, at the end of that period, he said, Gad, you get to go back to your possession. But I sold it to someone from the tribe of Asher. That's okay. They have to be fair with you and return that to you and deal with you justly, and you get to go back to your possession. You get to go back to your possession. If you have been sold as a slave, going back to number 2, you get to be set free. Okay? Slavery was not like we think about it these days, where you're going, a ship landed somewhere, went out and captured people and brought them somewhere to forcibly work. There was some of that in the Bible, but sometimes you just had to sell yourself as an indentured servant or a slave to survive. Because if you were in a place where your land was not producing, there was a drought there was something, if you stayed there, you'd die. So you would sell yourself to somebody else and say, I will work for you in order that I might live. And you'd bring your whole family with you. It was a big deal. So during this Year of Jubilee, you would get freedom again. That wouldn't be forever. Freedom was restored to you. Remember? Seasons of restoration. You'd be restored. You'd be restored. So that was the first 3. Number 4, you rely on God for your provision. In the year of Jubilee, not only like what they did on the Sabbath, where they would prepare everything a day in advance and they would rest from their works, on this whole year, they would let everything rest and they would rely on gathering. Whatever grew of itself naturally, they could gather, but they wouldn't have to go out and do any work to make that happen. It's a way for us to think of it this way. They would put their trust in God for that year. And then finally, number 5, you're thinking, shouldn't they do that all the time? They would deal with each other justly and fairly. They would deal with each other, no more, no more saying, well, I got these eggs for $3 and I'm going to sell them to you for $7.75 or whatever. No more of that. No, $3 plus my time to get over to your house, I'll give it to you for $3.25. All right, we're good to go. Fairness. Can you see where this might be going? It sounds like a pretty good way to live, doesn't it? To have things restored to you. I think maybe that some of our laws in our country were designed around this, that if somebody really got in a place where they were in big trouble, although it's not good for your credit, it's really not a good solution, but we have something called bankruptcy, where if you really get bad, you can just say, hey, I got to file bankruptcy, otherwise I can't afford food. And, and that's in our laws. There is supposed to be to help somebody so that we're not killing somebody because of debt. Essentially not forcing them to be homeless and so on and so forth. But did you know that there is no historical or biblical record that Israel ever practiced the year of Jubilee? You'll never find it in the Bible. Later on, in different areas in the Bible, you'll never find it was the Jubilee and they did it. You'll never find Josephus. You'll never find another historian ever write about, well, it was the year of Jubilee and everybody did this. Do you want to know why? I believe, I don't know this for certain, I wasn't back there, but here's what I believe. Hey man, when you got a hold of something, it's hard to let it go. When you've taken possession of someone's property, oh man, I'll tell you, especially around here, I found out in Missouri, people don't like to sell land. We have a farm over by Salem, and we want to sell it, and we're hoping to maybe someday, not right away, but somewhere in the future when we can afford it, to buy a piece of property around here. And I was walking down the gravel road down here, and I won't mention any names, but some of you guys will figure it out because it's a small community. One of the cattle people around here with lots of land, I said to him, hey, he pulled up and was talking to us. I said, hey, what's the chances that someday maybe you'd break off a 20 or 40 for me and sell it? Not a chance. I said, well, do you know anybody around here that might want to sell? He goes, if I did, I wouldn't tell you. I'm like, well, I guess I'll just have to wait on that. But it was okay. It was fine. I'm kind of over-exaggerating a little bit. He didn't really look at me and be rude or nothing like that. But anyway, I understand when you grab a hold of it. People are like, man, if my neighbor's place ever comes for sale, I'm snatching it up. People want to add to their land. They don't want to diminish. And it was no different for Israel. Once they had an indentured servant, they didn't just want to release him because they had invested a lot of time and money to bring that family over, to have them as a part of their property now, or their household. Like I said, it's a totally different than what, I'm not talking about African slavery here. It's a completely different deal. These people, it's like Joseph. He was a slave, but he was in charge of Potiphar's whole house. He wasn't walking around getting whipped. He was walking around looking pretty sharp and, in charge of things, That's, in some ways, some of the occasions that it looked like there. There is no record that Israel ever practiced the year of Jubilee. God gave it to them as a command, but they never did do that. But do you know that Jesus fulfilled the law of Jubilee? Jesus fulfilled it. Like I said, this is a good reason why it's good to take notes, because you're going to want to refer back to these 5 points in just a moment. But let's look at Luke chapter 4. Luke chapter 4, starting in verse 16. And it says this. This is Jesus' first public reading other than when he was 12 that's recorded in the temple there. But after he went and was baptized and he got filled with the Holy Spirit, here's what it says. He came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and he stood up to read. And he was handed the book of the prophet Isaiah. And when he had opened the book, he found the place where it was written. Now this is Isaiah, where he's reading. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the good news, the gospel, to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted and to proclaim liberty to the captives. That's Jubilee language. It's the acceptable year. It's time to bring liberty to the captives, to the recovery of the sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, and to proclaim this is the acceptable year of the Lord. Then he closed the book. He gave it back to the attendant. He sat down, and the eyes of all who were in the synagogue were fixed on him. Brenda, would you come up? And he began to say to them, today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing. Jesus fulfilled every aspect of the year of Jubilee. And I'm going to show you by those 5 points. See, what the people of Israel failed to see in God's laws was that Jubilee was pointing towards their salvation. Number one, yes, Jubilee was announced on the Day of Atonement. See, you overlooked that when we were looking back at that. And why did he have them blow the trumpet for the year of Jubilee on the Day of Atonement? Was because God saw to the future where he would send his son to atone for the sins of the whole world. Liberty from sin and death. That's why it was announced on the Day of Atonement. Number two, the announcement of Jubilee is liberty, release, setting free. Jesus came to set the captive free, to heal the sick, to release the demonically oppressed or possessed from their captor, and of course to save the world from sin. Number three, Jubilee says, hey, you get to return to your possession and to your family. Jesus made a way for us to come back to our original condition of our earliest ancestor, Adam. Jesus became the second Adam so that we could get back into right standing with God. Isn't that cool? So that now we can be counted as members of the family of God. That's the Jubilee. Number four, Jubilee said God will be our provision. Jesus said this, if you remain in the vine, God himself will be your source, both to save and to forever sustain. And by the way, I've talked about this a number of times. Look into the word sometimes. Salvation means healed. It means in your spirit, your mind, and your body, the whole man healed. Now, of course, we're all going to, until the Lord's second coming, we're going to pass from this life one day. But in the meantime, God's taken whips upon his back so that you can be healed. God's flesh was pierced so that you could be healed. He's our source. And number five, during the year of Jubilee, Israel was to deal with each other justly. Like I said, ain't that like supposed to be every day? But now in the kingdom of Jesus, if we endeavor to love God, we must also love our neighbor as ourselves. How challenging. So church, in 2025, and I'm not going to probably say the exact same thing in 2026, but in a new year, I want you to realize that God set up these seasons for a reason. This is a chance for us to reflect, to look back upon the previous year. This is our opportunity for Jubilee. This is our opportunity to receive everything that Jesus did for us. This is our chance. And you know what? Tomorrow you'll get another chance. Every day is an opportunity. But hear what the Lord said about today. Listen to me, church. Today is the day. 2 Corinthians 6:2, for he says, in an acceptable time, that's Jubilee language, in an acceptable time I have heard you, and in the day of salvation I have helped you. Behold, now is the accepted time. Behold, now is the day of salvation. Right now is your opportunity.